Custodian solved the launch bug. Rockets rolled at dawn. The digital clock on the wall of Mission Control showed 3:47 a.m., its red numbers burning through the darkness like angry eyes. The room that should have been buzzing with excitement was instead thick with frustration and fear. In less than 3 hours, the Meridian 7 rocket was supposed to launch, carrying a satellite that would bring internet to remote villages across 3 continents. But now, a stubborn red light on the main console refused to turn green. The abort alarm had been screaming for the past hour, and nobody could figure out why. Flight Director Marcus Chen stood at the center of the chaos, his usually neat black hair now disheveled from running his hands through it too many times. Around him, 23 of the brightest engineers in the country hunched over their computers, their faces glowing blue in the screen light. Coffee cups had piled up on desks like small towers, and the air smelled of burnt coffee and desperation. Marcus's phone hadn't stopped ringing. Calls from investors, from the media team, from corporate headquarters. Each ring felt like a hammer hitting his chest. This launch had taken 4 years to prepare. The satellite cost $900 million. If they missed this launch window, they would have to wait another 6 weeks, and by then, a competing company would launch first. Everything they had worked for would crumble like sand. "I've checked every system 3 times, said Elena Vasquez, the lead software engineer. Her voice cracked with exhaustion. She had been awake for 31 hours straight, living on energy drinks and determination. The pressure readings are normal. Temperature is perfect. Fuel lines are clear, but this ghost alarm won't stop. Her fingers flew across her keyboard, pulling up diagnostic screens that meant nothing to most people but were like reading a map to her. Still, the map led nowhere. Every path ended at the same red wall. "We're running out of time," Marcus said, though everyone already knew. The launch window would close at 6:30 a.m. sharp. After that, the Earth's rotation and the satellite's intended orbit wouldn't align properly. It was like trying to throw a ball to someone on a moving train. You had to time it perfectly, or you'd miss completely. Has anyone checked the physical components? Maybe it's not a software issue. "I personally inspected every sensor yesterday," replied David Kim, the hardware specialist. His lab coat had coffee stains on it, evidence of his shaking hands from too much caffeine and too little sleep. Everything was green then. Nothing has changed. The rocket hasn't moved. No one has touched it since the final checks. He pulled up photos on his tablet, showing each component, each wire, each connection point. Everything looked perfect in the pictures. But pictures couldn't capture whatever invisible problem was haunting them now. Outside the control room, in the vast hangar that housed the rocket, a different kind of work was happening. Omar Riaz pushed his mop across the polished concrete floor, the rhythmic swishing sound echoing in the massive space. He had been the night custodian at the Space Center for 12 years, arriving every evening at 10 p.m. and leaving when the sun came up. While the engineers worked with computers and calculations, Omar worked with soap and water, making sure their workspace stayed clean. He knew every corner of this building, every sound it made at night, every shadow that moved when the wind blew outside. Omar was 62 years old, with gray hair that he kept neat under his baseball cap and hands that had become rough from years of honest work. He had immigrated from Pakistan 40 years ago with nothing but hope and determination. He never went to college, couldn't afford it while raising 3 kids as a single father after his wife passed away from cancer. But Omar had something that no degree could teach. He listened. He listened to the building like it was alive, noticed when something was different, when a sound was out of place. The other workers sometimes smiled at him, the quiet man with the mop, but they didn't know that Omar understood more than they imagined. During his breaks, he read the technical manuals left lying around, taught himself about rockets and satellites, not because he had to, but because he was curious about the magnificent machines he cleaned around. Tonight felt different to Omar. There was a tension in the air that went beyond the usual pre-launch nervousness. As he mopped near the entrance to Mission Control, he could hear raised voices inside, the kind of desperate arguing that happened when smart people ran out of smart ideas. He had seen this before, 3 years ago, when a launch was almost canceled because of a computer glitch that turned out to be a mouse that had chewed through a cable. Sometimes, Omar thought, the biggest problems had the smallest causes. As he worked his way toward the rocket hangar, Omar noticed something else. His coffee break was at 4 a.m., and he always took it in the same spot, a small alcove near the guidance bay where he could sit on a crate and watch the rocket through the window. It was peaceful there, usually silent except for the hum of the ventilation system. But tonight, as he approached his usual spot, he heard something different. It was subtle, so quiet that most people would miss it entirely. But Omar's ears, trained by years of listening to the building's nighttime symphony, caught it immediately. A thin, high whistle like the sound a glass bottle makes when you blow across its top. Omar set down his mop and followed the sound. It led him into the guidance bay, a room filled with racks of sensors and computers that helped the rocket know which way was up once it left Earth. The whistle grew louder as he moved deeper into the room, his footsteps careful and quiet. The overhead lights were dim, casting long shadows between the equipment racks. Omar's eyes, adjusted to working in partial darkness, scanned the room methodically. Then he saw it. Above one of the sensor racks near an air vent, a piece of clear plastic wrapping, probably left behind by someone unpacking equipment, was caught in the airflow. It flapped rapidly, creating that whistling sound, but more importantly, it was partially blocking the vent, creating irregular air pressure in the room. Omar stepped closer and saw the sensor directly below the vent. It was a pressure sensor designed to detect if there was a leak in the guidance bay. The flapping plastic was creating pressure variations that the sensor interpreted as a leak. The computer, following its programming perfectly, had triggered the abort alarm. It was doing exactly what it was supposed to do: protect the rocket from launching with a potential problem. Omar stared at the plastic for a moment, his mind working through the connections. Such a small thing, nearly invisible, causing such a massive problem. He had to tell someone, but who would listen to the custodian? He thought of all the times people had walked past him like he was part of the furniture, invisible and unimportant. But this was bigger than pride or hurt feelings. This was about the mission, about all those people who wouldn't give up even when everything seemed lost. He walked quickly but calmly to Mission Control. The security guard at the door, a young man named Trevor, looked surprised. "Omar, you can't go in there right now. They're dealing with something critical." "I know," Omar said, his voice steady and certain. "That's why I need to go in." Trevor hesitated. He had known Omar for 2 years, had never seen the older man ask for anything or cause any trouble. Something in Omar's eyes, a quiet confidence, made him step aside. "Make it quick." Omar entered the mission control room, and immediately 24 pairs of eyes turned to him. Some faces showed confusion, others irritation. Here they were, in the middle of a crisis, and the janitor was walking in. Marcus Chen started to speak, probably to ask him to leave, but Omar raised his hand gently. "Sir," Omar said, his voice clear despite his nervousness, "your rocket thinks it's missing air." The room went silent. Marcus blinked, processing the unexpected statement. "What do you mean?" Omar explained what he had found, his words simple but precise. He didn't use fancy technical terms, just described the plastic, the vent, the sensor, and the whistle. As he spoke, Elena Vasquez's fingers were already flying across her keyboard, pulling up the pressure sensor data from the guidance bay. Her eyes widened. "The readings," she said, her voice barely a whisper at first, then louder. "The pressure readings from Bay 7 sensor. They're fluctuating in a pattern, not like a real leak would create, but like something irregular blocking airflow." She looked up at Omar with something close to awe. "You're right. The system thinks there's a leak because the pressure keeps changing." Marcus was already moving, grabbing a radio. "Maintenance team to Guidance Bay 7 immediately. We need a ladder and someone to check the ventilation above sensor rack G7. He turned to Omar. "Show us." The next 10 minutes moved like a perfectly choreographed dance. Omar led them to the spot, pointed up at the nearly invisible piece of plastic. A maintenance technician climbed the ladder, carefully removed the plastic, making sure not to disturb anything else. Elena reset the sensor system from her laptop, her fingers moving with renewed energy. The room held its breath as she initiated a system check. The red light flickered, hesitated, then turned green. The cheer that erupted could probably be heard outside the building. Engineers who hadn't smiled in hours were now laughing, slapping each other on the back, some with tears in their eyes. The mission was saved. The launch could proceed. Years of work wouldn't be wasted. But in the middle of the celebration, Marcus noticed Omar standing quietly by the door, already reaching for his mop. "Wait," Marcus called out, walking over to him. The room gradually quieted, all eyes following their flight director. Marcus stood in front of Omar, this man in a custodian's uniform who had just saved a $900 million mission. "What's your name?" "Omar Riaz, sir." "How did you know, Mr. Riaz? How did you know to look there?" Omar's weathered face crinkled into a small smile. "I've been cleaning these rooms for 12 years, sir. I know every sound this building makes. Tonight, something was singing that shouldn't have been singing. So I listened." He paused, then added, "I also read the technical manuals during my breaks. I like to understand the things I clean around. These machines, they're magnificent. They deserve respect, and sometimes respect means paying attention to the small things." Marcus felt something tight in his throat. Here was a man who everyone overlooked, who worked in the shadows while others basked in the spotlight of their achievements. Yet he had saved them all, not with complex calculations or advanced degrees, but with careful attention and genuine care for his work. "The launch," Elena announced, looking at her screen. "We're go for launch in 90 minutes. All systems are green." The room burst into activity again, engineers returning to their stations, preparing for the final countdown. But Marcus didn't move. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something Omar had seen before, but never imagined would be offered to him. A mission patch, the embroidered badge that only team members received, showing the Meridian 7 rocket and the constellation of satellites it would deliver. "Mr. Riaz," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved our morning, and maybe our mission. This patch belongs to every member of the launch team. You've more than earned it." He pressed the patch into Omar's palm. Omar looked down at it, his thumb tracing the golden threads that formed the rocket. Around them, several engineers had stopped working to watch. One of them started clapping, then another, and soon the entire room was applauding the night custodian who had heard what none of them could hear. Omar's eyes grew wet. He had come to this country with nothing, had worked countless jobs, had raised his children to believe that dignity came from doing your work well, no matter what that work was. Now, in this moment, he felt seen in a way he never had before, not just as the man who cleaned the floors, but as someone whose contribution mattered. "Thank you," he said quietly, then louder so everyone could hear. "Thank you. But I was just doing my job. We all have our parts to play." He looked around the room at the young faces, brilliant minds who would send humanity's dreams into space. "You build rockets that touch the stars. I make sure you have a clean place to do it. Both jobs matter." As Omar headed back to finish his shift, the eastern sky was beginning to pale with the approaching dawn. He could hear the announcement over the loudspeakers. The rocket was being moved to the launch pad. He found a spot outside where he could watch, his mop bucket beside him, the mission patch carefully tucked in his shirt pocket over his heart. The rocket rolled out on its massive crawler, moving slowly like a giant awakening from sleep. The sunrise painted it gold and orange, making the white metal glow like something mythical. Omar watched as the machine he had helped save made its way to the pad. Other workers were gathering to watch too, not just the engineers and scientists, but the security guards, the cafeteria staff, the other maintenance workers. They all stood together, unified in this moment of human achievement. David Kim found Omar in the crowd and stood beside him. "Mr. Riaz, I owe you an apology." Omar looked at him, confused. "For what?" "For walking past you 100 times and never really seeing you. For not realizing that you were as much a part of this team as any of us." David's voice was sincere, humble. "You taught us something important today, that solutions can come from anywhere, from anyone, if we're willing to listen. We all have things to teach," Omar replied. and things to learn. That's what makes us human. The countdown began, broadcast over the speakers. T-minus 10 minutes. Omar remembered his first day at the Space Center, how he had stood in awe of the rockets, feeling small and insignificant. He had thought then that he was just the man who cleaned up after the important people did important work. But now he understood differently. Every person here, from the flight director to the night custodian, was part of something bigger. They were all reaching for the stars together, each in their own way. T-minus 60 seconds. The crowd grew quiet. Omar could feel the anticipation, the collective holding of breath. Somewhere in Mission Control, Marcus Chen was going through the final checks. Elena Vasquez was monitoring her screens, and the abort alarm system was showing a steady, reassuring green T-minus 10 seconds. Omar gripped his mission patch, feeling the raised embroidery against his palm. His children would be so proud. His grandchildren would tell this story, how their grandfather, with his mop and his careful ears, had saved a rocket launch. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The engines ignited with a roar that Omar felt in his chest. The ground trembled, windows rattled, and the rocket began its slow, majestic rise. Smoke billowed out in massive clouds, but through it, the bright flame of the engines was visible, pushing the rocket higher and higher. The crowd cheered, some people crying, others hugging. Omar stood still, watching as the rocket climbed into the dawn sky, carrying with it the hopes and dreams of thousands of people, including one night custodian who had simply listened when no one else could hear. As the rocket became a distant point of light, Marcus Chen's voice came over the speakers. "Launch successful. Meridian 7 is on its way." The crowd erupted again, but then Marcus continued. "I want to take a moment to thank everyone who made this possible, especially Omar Riaz from our maintenance team, who detected a problem our computers couldn't find. Mr. Riaz reminded us that innovation and problem-solving don't require a degree or a title. They require attention, dedication, and care. Thank you, Omar." People turned to look at Omar, many seeing him clearly for the first time. Some nodded with respect, others smiled with genuine warmth. A few of the younger engineers approached him, wanting to hear more about how he had figured it out, eager to learn from his experience. Omar answered their questions patiently, his usual quiet voice growing stronger with each word. As the sun fully rose and his shift came to an end, Omar collected his supplies and headed to the employee exit. But something had changed. The hallways he had walked alone for 12 years now felt different. People nodded to him, said good morning, asked his opinion about strange sounds they had heard. He wasn't invisible anymore. In the parking lot, Omar sat in his old Toyota for a moment before driving home. He pulled out the mission patch and looked at it in the morning light. It wasn't just a piece of fabric with some embroidery. It was recognition, validation, proof that every person's contribution mattered. He thought about all the people who worked in the shadows, the cleaners, the cooks, the security guards, the maintenance crews. They all kept the world running while others got the glory. But today, for one brief moment, the spotlight had found one of them. When Omar got home, his daughter Amira was waiting for him, still in her pajamas. She worked as a teacher and had been following the launch on the news. "Dad, they mentioned your name. The flight director thanked you on live television. What happened?" Omar hugged his daughter and showed her the patch. "I just listened," he said simply. "I heard something that wasn't right and I spoke up. But Dad, you saved the entire mission." Omar smiled, the kind of deep, satisfied smile that comes from knowing your worth isn't determined by others but by how well you do whatever work is in front of you. "No, Beta. We all saved it together. The engineers built it, the programmers coded it, the directors organized it, and I cleaned around it. But today, I also got to fix it. Just a small fix, but it mattered." Later that morning, as Omar finally lay down to sleep, he could still hear the rocket's roar in his memory. Somewhere above the Earth, the satellite was deploying, preparing to beam internet to villages that had never been connected before. Children in remote mountains would soon be able to attend online classes. Doctors in isolated clinics would be able to consult with specialists thousands of miles away. All because a rocket had launched successfully, And that rocket had launched because a custodian had heard a whistle in the dark. The next night, when Omar returned to work, he found his locker decorated with a banner that read, "Mission Specialist Omar Riaz." Inside was a new uniform with the mission patch already sewn on, and a note from Marcus Chen. A reminder that heroes come in all forms. Thank you for teaching us to listen. Omar touched the patch on his uniform and picked up his mop. There was work to do, floors to clean, and yes, sounds to listen for. Because in this place where humans reached for the stars, every detail mattered, every person had value, and sometimes the smallest observation could make the biggest difference. As he pushed his cart down the hallway, past the photos of rockets and astronauts, Omar realized he had always been part of the mission. It had just taken a piece of plastic and a whistle in the dark for everyone else to see it too. The Space Center continued its work, preparing for the next launch, the next challenge, the next dream to send skyward. And in the quiet hours before dawn, Omar Riaz continued his work too, the custodian who solved the launch bug, the man who listened when no one else could hear, a reminder that in humanity's greatest endeavors, there are no small roles. Only people who do their part with dedication and care. The rockets rolled at dawn, reaching for the stars, but they flew because of everyone who worked below them, from the most brilliant engineer to the most careful custodian, all of them together, pushing humanity forward, one launch, one solution, one act of attention at a time.